I remember the exact moment my phone slipped out of my hand and hit the hospital sheets. Not because I was too weak to hold it, but because I couldn't believe what I had just heard. I was lying in a hospital bed, stitched up from shoulder to hip, barely able to move without pain, and my mother told me they were too busy to visit. Too busy. I had called her hoping, no, praying, that maybe, just this once, my pain would matter enough for them to show up. I didn't expect flowers or a dramatic scene, just a simple, "We're on our way." Or even, "We'll be there soon." But instead, I got a carefully neutral tone and a sigh. She said, "Oh, honey, that sounds awful, but we've got so much going on right now. Rick's got his investor meetings, and Chase and Morgan are coming over for dinner. Maybe we can come see you next week if things calm down." I lay there, frozen, not just from the morphine drip, but from the quiet ache of disappointment. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't even ask which hospital I was in until I brought it up myself. When I told her I'd been in a serious car accident, that a drunk driver ran a red light and plowed into me at 60 miles per hour, she let out a small gasp, not the panicked, motherly kind, the kind you give when you realize something's inconvenient. I told her I had 2 broken ribs, a fractured pelvis, internal bleeding, that I'd been through emergency surgery and would be recovering here for at least a week. There was a pause. Then, "Well, thank God you're alive. That's what matters." As if that alone should be enough comfort. That conversation didn't even last 5 minutes. She said she'd try to check in later and hung up before I could respond. I stared at the blank screen for a long time after the call ended. I could still feel the phantom heat of the phone in my hand, but the part of me that needed her had gone cold. I had never felt so alone in my life. Not just physically, but soul deep alone. The kind of alone that feels like a wound you can't stitch shut. Nurses came and went. Machines beeped softly beside me. The woman in the bed next to mine had her sister sitting with her, brushing her hair, reading to her. Every time I looked over, I'd feel something twist inside me. Not jealousy exactly, but a realization that some people have people, and I didn't. What made it worse was that I wasn't surprised. Hurt, yes. Shaken, definitely. But surprised? Somewhere deep down, I had always known that my family didn't really see me. I was the one who always called, always visited, always offered help, and got nothing real back in return. I was the family backup plan, the emotional punching bag, the girl who got compared to her golden boy brother and always came up short. But still, I had hoped. Even after years of being left out of group chats, of holidays where no one saved me a seat, of conversations where I became invisible, I still thought that if something truly terrible happened, they'd show up. That they'd push all the petty things aside and remember I was their daughter. Their sister. I learned the truth that day. I could be broken, bleeding, barely breathing, and they still wouldn't come. When I turned my head and caught a glimpse of myself in the tiny wall mirror, I almost didn't recognize the woman looking back. Pale, bruised, with dried blood along her collarbone, and eyes swollen from crying. But it wasn't just the physical injuries that made me a stranger to myself. It was the new knowledge burning behind my eyes. The truth that I had been abandoned in the moment I needed them most. That night, I lay there in the hospital bed, my body aching, but my heart numb. I stared at the ceiling and made myself a quiet promise. I wouldn't beg for love anymore. I wouldn't keep knocking on doors that were never going to open for me. I didn't know it yet, but that was the night I began to change. The night I stopped hoping for them to save me and started preparing to save myself. Before the accident, my life was quiet. Not perfect, but mine. I lived alone in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Austin. It wasn't much, but it had good light, and it felt safe. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, mostly doing logos and social media content for small businesses and nonprofits. Some months were tight, others were better, but I liked the freedom. I didn't answer to anyone, and after growing up constantly trying to please people who never really saw me, that freedom felt sacred. My name is Lena Hale. I'm 29 years old. And until that car accident, I was still holding on to this fragile idea that maybe, just maybe, my family would come around one day. My mom, Joan, is a woman who cares a lot about appearances. She's the kind of person who irons her dish towels and judges people by their choice of car. She believes in hard work, but only if it looks a certain way. Steady salary, benefits, preferably something you can explain at dinner parties. To her, my freelance work was cute, but not real. She used to tell people I was doing art stuff online, like I was some teenager sketching in a notebook, not running a full-time business. My dad, Rick, was always more of a shadow in the room than a voice. He doesn't like conflict, and he certainly doesn't like standing up to Joan. He'd smile at me at family gatherings, ask about my projects, and then turn around and agree with her that I should get a real job someday. His version of love is quiet, detached, and passive. Then there's my older brother, Chase, 33, married, works in finance, and the undeniable favorite. He was always the golden boy. Class president, straight A student, married his college girlfriend, got promoted every year without fail. Joan and Rick adored him. They never said it outright, but everything about the way they treated him said, "This is what success looks like." And everything about the way they treated me said, "Why can't you be more like him?" Growing up, I was the one who stayed home and helped with dinner while Chase ran off to football practice. I was the one who cleaned up after holidays, made the photo albums, remembered everyone's birthdays, while he showed up late and got praised for just being there. And no matter how hard I worked, it always felt like I was one mistake away from being invisible again. Still, I didn't hate them. I wanted them to love me. I wanted them to see me, to take interest in my life. So I kept reaching out. I called on birthdays, sent gifts at Christmas, drove out to family dinners even when I wasn't invited. I kept trying, hoping. There was always this unspoken rule in our family. Chase was the sun, and the rest of us orbited around him. At holidays, the conversation always steered toward his job, his new house, his plans. I'd mention a client project I was proud of, and Joan would smile politely and ask if I'd considered applying to real jobs lately. Rick would change the subject. Chase would scroll on his phone. And yet, I kept showing up, because I thought maybe if I kept being dependable, they'd finally notice. Maybe if I became successful enough, they'd stop dismissing me. Maybe if I just waited it out, they'd soften. A few weeks before the accident, I had even driven out to my parents' house, an hour each way, to help Mom clean out the garage before a storm. Chase was supposed to come too, but he got caught up at work. I spent 4 hours hauling boxes while Joan gave me unsolicited advice about how I was wasting my 20s. I cried the whole way home, but I didn't say anything. I never did. Looking back, I don't know why I expected them to change. I guess I just believed that if the day ever came when I really needed them, everything would fall away. The judgments, the distance, the roles, and I'd finally matter. That belief lived in me like a seed I couldn't dig out, no matter how often it failed to grow. And then the accident happened. And when I picked up the phone, barely able to move, thinking, this is it. This is when they'll finally come through. I learned how deeply I had mistaken obligation for love. Everything that happened after that, every shift, every boundary, every choice, started right there. With the realization that the people I'd been trying to prove myself to my entire life had never once tried to meet me where I was. The thing about dysfunction is that it doesn't always look dramatic. It's not always screaming matches or slammed doors. In my family, it was silence, shrugs, polite digs that looked like love but felt like shame. Growing up, I never had a name for what I felt, just this deep, gnawing sense that I was constantly falling short of some invisible expectation. If I got an A, Chase had gotten an A+. If I made the honor roll, he'd just been named Student of the Month. I learned early on that no matter how hard I worked, he'd always be one step ahead, and they'd always be looking in his direction. My mother, Joan, didn't yell. She corrected. Everything. My posture, my tone, the way I chewed my food. She called it guidance. I called it never being good enough. She had this subtle way of making me feel like my existence was just a list of things to improve. If I dressed casually, she'd say, I looked tired. If I wore makeup, she'd ask if I was going somewhere important. No matter what I did, it always came with a shadow of disapproval. With my dad, Rick, things were simpler and somehow more painful. He wasn't cruel. He was just absent. He was there, physically, at dinner, at holidays. But not once do I remember him standing up for me. Not once do I remember him pushing back when my mom undermined me or rolled her eyes at my dreams. He'd just sip his coffee and check his phone. He existed in this fog of non-intervention, always one step removed from discomfort. And Chase? He wasn't evil, just entitled. He grew up being praised for every tiny success, and over time, he came to expect the world to applaud his bare minimum. He teased me a lot, called me sensitive, moody, artsy. When I told him I was going to study design, he said, "Cool, so, like, coloring?" When I landed my first paid client, he said, "Do they pay you an exposure or something?" Our parents laughed. Every part of my life, my work, my hobbies, even the way I talked, was treated like it didn't quite count. I was the family joke, the sweet, weird, creative one. They said it like it was an allergy or a phase. At first, I tried to fight it, overcompensated, worked twice as hard, took every project I could get, built a business from scratch with no help, and still felt like I had to prove I wasn't just playing adult. But the worst part wasn't how they treated me. It was how I learned to treat myself. I internalized everything. I started filtering my own emotions before they could. If I was excited about something, I'd mute it. If I was struggling, I'd hide it. I didn't want to give them ammunition. I didn't want to hear their version of constructive criticism again. And even when I was hurt, I made excuses for them. They're old-fashioned. They just don't get it. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. It took years of quiet heartbreaks and small humiliations for me to realize this wasn't normal. That love isn't supposed to feel like a job interview you're always failing. I remember one Thanksgiving, I brought a homemade pie. I had spent the whole morning on it, my grandmother's old recipe, made from scratch. When I set it down on the table, Joan gave me a tight smile and said, "Oh, you baked?" "That's a surprise." Chase laughed. Rick said nothing. They didn't even taste it. At the end of the night, it was still untouched. And yet, I drove home hoping I'd done enough to make them proud. That's what dysfunction does. It conditions you to accept breadcrumbs and call it a feast. It teaches you that if you're not being hit or screamed at, then it must be love. That as long as the house is quiet, you're safe. But emotional neglect is its own kind of violence. A quiet war you fight alone. When I was lying in that hospital bed, playing her words over in my head, "We're too busy to visit," it hit me. This wasn't new. It had always been this way. The accident didn't break anything. It just revealed what had already been broken. And for the first time, I stopped blaming myself for it. It happened on a Thursday night. I was driving home from a client meeting. Nothing out of the ordinary. The streets were quiet. I remember feeling proud, actually. I'd just landed a big rebranding project with a nonprofit I'd admired for years. It felt like maybe, just maybe, things were starting to fall into place. And then everything shattered. I was waiting at a red light near 12th and Comal. My music was low, the windows cracked just enough to let in the cool air. I remember seeing the light turn green. I pressed the gas. The next thing I remember is the sound. Metal screaming. Glass exploding. My body flung sideways like a rag doll. Then silence. And blood. So much blood. A drunk driver had run the red light at 60 miles per hour. He hit me full speed, T-boned the driver's side, crushing the door inward. I don't remember screaming. I just remember the taste of blood and the smell of gasoline. People always say your life flashes before your eyes. But for me, It wasn't memories. It was people. My parents. My brother. Faces I hadn't seen in months. And one single thought. No one's going to come for me. I blacked out. When I woke up, I was in the hospital, hooked to machines, my mouth dry, my body aching in ways I didn't know were possible. A nurse named Ellie was adjusting something on the IV. She smiled when she saw my eyes open and said, "You're lucky. We almost lost you." I wanted to ask what happened, but I couldn't form the words. Later that day, a doctor came in and explained my injuries: broken ribs, a fractured pelvis, internal bleeding, a concussion. They'd done emergency surgery, and I'd be recovering for at least 10 days in the hospital before beginning physical therapy. I nodded, dazed, pretending to absorb it all, but my thoughts were somewhere else entirely. I reached for my phone as soon as I could lift my arm. It felt like a brick in my hand. I typed out a message to my mom with shaky fingers. "Got into a bad accident. I'm okay. In hospital. Call me." 10 minutes passed, then 20, then an hour. Eventually, I called her. When she picked up, her voice was normal, calm, almost like I'd interrupted her evening show. I told her what happened, that I was hurt, in pain, scared, that I was in the ICU, recovering from surgery. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She just said, "Oh no, that's terrible timing, sweetheart. We've got a lot going on right now. I'll see if we can come down next week." Next week. I don't even remember what I said after that. I think I just mumbled something about the hospital name and hung up before I could hear the rest of her sentence. I stared at the ceiling tiles in that hospital room and realized I'd just been through one of the most traumatic experiences of my life, and the first person I called didn't care enough to come see me. No flowers, no visit, no follow-up text, just silence. My brother Chase sent a short text the next day. "Heard about the accident, hope you're okay." That was it. No call, no visit, not even a joke to lighten the mood. It felt like I was shouting underwater and no one could hear me. But people did show up. The trauma counselor stopped by the next morning. Ellie, the nurse, sat with me for a few minutes on her break and asked about my favorite movies. A janitor named Reggie sang softly as he mopped the floor and winked at me when he caught me listening. Strangers offered more comfort than my own family. That's when something inside me cracked open. For the first time, I truly saw my family for who they were, not who I had hoped they'd become. It wasn't that they were unavailable because they were busy. It was because they simply didn't care enough. They cared more about Chase's dinner party or my dad's meetings than whether their daughter had nearly died in a car crash. And that moment, lying in that hospital bed, staring at my phone screen, waiting for a text that wouldn't come, that was the breaking point. That was when I stopped reaching out, and when I started planning what I would do with the silence they left behind. The days after the accident were a blur of painkillers, silence, and realization. Physically, I was healing. Slowly, the bruises were fading. My stitches were holding. The doctors were hopeful. But emotionally, I was unraveling. I felt like I was watching my own life from the corner of the room, too tired to rejoin it. Every morning, a nurse came in to check my vitals and chart my progress. They were kind, warm, patient. They joked with me. They called me sweetheart. They listened when I spoke. But every time the door closed behind them, the room filled with a cold quiet that wrapped around my chest like a second set of broken ribs. My phone stayed on the nightstand. I checked it more than I'd like to admit, hoping for something, a message, a missed call, a sign of concern. But there was nothing. No one came, no flowers, no voice messages, no apology for the brush-off. Not from Joan, not from Rick, not from Chase. The silence hit harder than the crash. I had always suspected I was low on their list of priorities, but this? This was confirmation. This wasn't just distance. This was abandonment. This was them showing me, in the clearest way possible, that my pain didn't inconvenience them enough to move. I remember one night, around 2 a.m., I woke up in a panic. My heart was racing. My mouth was dry. I didn't know if it was the meds or the trauma or something else entirely, but I needed someone. Anyone. I reached for my phone and stared at the contact list. My thumb hovered over my mother's name. I hesitated, then moved to Chase, then back again, and then I just locked the screen and placed it back on the table. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't be the one who always reached out, who always begged for scraps of attention, who always hoped they'd change. That night, something hardened inside me. I didn't cry. I just lay there in the dark, staring at the red glow of the heart monitor, realizing I was the only one showing up for me. And I always had been. I started journaling from my hospital bed. I wasn't sure why at first. Maybe I needed somewhere to put the anger, the grief. Maybe I needed to see it all laid out in front of me. The years of being overlooked, dismissed, and minimized. I wrote until my hand cramped. I wrote about birthdays forgotten, holidays where I sat in silence, phone calls that ended in guilt instead of comfort. It poured out like water from a cracked pipe. All the pain I had swallowed down over the years. The times they made me feel like a burden, like a failure, like I wasn't really part of them, just a side character in their perfect little narrative. Chase, the shining star. Joan, the perfectionist matriarch. Rick, the quiet patriarch. And me, the afterthought. There was grief, yes, but there was also rage. A white-hot kind of anger that I'd never let myself feel before. I had always been the calm one, the peacemaker, the forgiving daughter. But lying there, stitched up and ignored, I felt something I had never truly allowed. Resentment. Resentment for all the times I defended them. For every time I made excuses. For all the years I blamed myself for not being enough, not successful enough, not agreeable enough, not Chase. That anger, oddly enough, was the first sign of healing. Because in that rage was the truth. I had value. I was worthy of care, of presence, of love, not because I earned it, but because I was a person. Their failure to show up wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of their inability to love me in the way I deserved. I started talking to the hospital therapist during her rounds. Her name was Dr. Jensen. She didn't offer quick fixes or sympathy cliches. She just listened, asked real questions. She told me, gently, "Lena, sometimes people love from a place of their own damage. That doesn't make their absence okay. It just means you can stop making it your job to fix them." That stuck with me. It still does. The emotional fallout of the accident wasn't just about the trauma of the crash. It was about everything it unearthed. The layers of dysfunction I had spent years burying under forced smiles and holiday visits. And now, there they were, fully exposed, demanding to be faced. I wasn't ready to forgive. I wasn't even ready to move on. But for the first time in my life, I was ready to stop pretending. Something started changing in me during the second week at the hospital. It wasn't a lightning bolt moment. It was slower than that. Quieter, like fog beginning to lift, like finally opening your eyes after sleeping too long and realizing the room isn't as dark as you thought. It was just your eyelids keeping the light out. I had spent the first week grieving what I'd lost, not just my physical strength or my sense of safety, but the idea that I had a real family to fall back on. I kept thinking, if they didn't come now, they never will. That thought used to feel like a death sentence, but now it started to feel like a release. I had been trying to earn love that was never truly mine. and for the first time I asked myself, why? Why did I keep fighting for people who had never fought for me? Why did I shrink every part of myself hoping they'd make room for it? Why did I pretend their neglect was normal, or that if I was just a little more successful, a little more agreeable, I'd finally be enough? That was the root of it, wasn't it? This idea that I had to be enough, that I had to fix myself in order to be loved. But what if I wasn't broken? What if they were just incapable of giving me the kind of love I needed, and that had nothing to do with me? I started to explore that thought more in my journal. At first, it felt foreign, like I was writing someone else's story. But with every page, it started to sound more like my own voice, a voice I'd silenced for years. I wrote about the holidays they forgot me, the times they changed the subject when I shared good news, the way Joan's face tightened when I tried to talk about my work. But I also wrote about what I loved, about the clients who lit up when I delivered something that captured their vision perfectly, about the nights I stayed up too late drawing because I was finally inspired, about the part of me that used to believe in more than just survival. I started to see myself outside of their definitions. I wasn't the moody one or the sensitive one or the difficult one. I was thoughtful, independent, creative, and incredibly strong because I had gotten through all of that, mostly alone, and I was still standing. Dr. Jensen, the hospital therapist, noticed the shift too. During one of our afternoon sessions, she said, "You're starting to ask the right questions, Lena. That's how it begins. That's how people reclaim their lives." It felt strange, reclaiming, like something had been taken from me. But the truth was, I had given it away, bit by bit, for years. I gave away my voice when I let Joan rewrite my memories. I gave away my worth when I accepted silence from my father. I gave away my light every time I let Chase turn me into a punchline. But now I was done trading pieces of myself for their approval. One day, I asked the nurse to help me sit by the window. It was a small thing, a short walk, a few painful steps with a walker, but it felt like a mountain. I sat there for 20 minutes watching the sun stretch over the buildings. I let it warm my face. I hadn't seen sunlight in days, and for a moment it felt like the world was reminding me I was still alive, still here, still mine. That night, I didn't check my phone. I didn't replay the silence or wonder if anyone would call. Instead, I opened my laptop, slowly, awkwardly, and began researching trauma recovery. Not because I had to, because I wanted to understand what was happening inside me. I wanted to feel more than broken. I wanted to feel in control. That same night, I drafted an email to a lawyer. I didn't send it yet, but I wanted to know my rights, not just for the car accident, but for what might come next. I didn't know it then, but this was the start of something bigger, a new kind of healing. One that didn't rely on apologies or second chances. One that came from looking in the mirror and saying, "You deserve better." I wasn't healed, not even close. But for the first time, I wasn't waiting for someone else to come save me. I was learning how to save myself. Recovery doesn't always look brave. Sometimes it looks like emailing a lawyer from a hospital bed with shaking hands. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the fiery, explosive way. That had passed. What I felt now was sharper, colder, focused, clarity. The moment I stopped hoping they'd change was the moment I realized I could stop asking permission to protect myself. It started with a quiet decision, one I didn't announce, one that no one clapped for. I decided I was going to stop telling my family anything personal. No more updates, no more invitations into my private life. Not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I'd spent so many years thinking that setting boundaries made me selfish. But lying there, healing alone, I finally understood. Boundaries aren't punishment, they're protection. And I needed them like I needed air. The first step was information control. I stopped answering Chase's 2-word texts. I didn't tell Joan when I was discharged from the hospital. I didn't even let them know I was home. I figured if they wanted to check in, they would. They didn't. The next step was legal. The hospital's financial department had informed me early on that, because the driver who hit me was intoxicated, I had a strong case for compensation. The other driver had multiple prior offenses. My injuries were extensive. I didn't even have to fight hard. Just show up, document everything, and let my attorney handle the rest. But I didn't tell my family that either. I kept it quiet. I didn't post about it. I didn't mention the growing settlement conversations to anyone outside of the legal and medical teams. I didn't want the Hales catching wind of it until the check was already in my hands. Because I knew what would happen if they did. This wasn't a guess. I knew my mother. I knew the way she could wrap greed in concern. I knew Chase would make some backhanded comment about how it must be nice to get rewarded for crashing your car. I knew Rick would nod and say nothing, like always. So, I kept things sealed tight. I met with my lawyer, Ms. Renna, over video call. She was blunt, sharp-eyed, and incredibly kind in a no-nonsense way that I hadn't realized I needed. She told me what to expect. A settlement likely close to $500,000, depending on negotiations. $500,000. It didn't feel real. It still doesn't, honestly. But what felt real was what I decided to do with it. Not splurging, not revenge, but freedom. I started making plans. A new apartment in a safer part of town. A car that didn't shake when I turned the ignition. Health insurance, physical therapy. A small emergency fund so I'd never again feel as helpless as I did that night in the hospital. And most of all, therapy. Long-term. Real therapy. Not quick fixes. I created a spreadsheet. Labeled it, Rebuild. Each row was a small act of rebellion against the girl I used to be. The girl who waited for permission to feel okay. Who waited for her family to approve her choices. Who thought survival wasn't enough unless it was impressive. Now, I didn't need them to be impressed. I needed to be free. Every step I took was quiet, strategic. Me building a life they didn't know about, and more importantly, didn't control. I even changed my emergency contact. I didn't tell them that either. The woman I listed instead? Mariah. She was the sister of my hospital roommate. A woman I'd barely known before the accident but who sat by my bed, asked about my art, and brought me coffee without being asked. She showed more humanity in 3 days than my own mother had in 3 decades. Mariah told me something one afternoon that I'll never forget. She said, "Sometimes the family you're born into teaches you exactly what kind of family you'll never tolerate again." And that hit me, because maybe I couldn't erase the years I lost trying to belong, but I could make damn sure I didn't waste one more second begging for scraps. So I built walls, not to shut people out, but to finally keep myself safe inside. And I waited, because I knew it was only a matter of time before they found out about the money. And when they did, I'd be ready. It started with a text from my mom. Simple, deceptively sweet. Joan Hale. "Hi, sweetie. We heard you got out of the hospital. Thought we'd come visit this weekend and bring lunch. Hope that's okay." That was it. No, "How are you?" No mention of the 2 weeks of silence. Just a sudden, casual offer to bring lunch. I stared at the message for a long time. My first instinct was confusion. Then the pieces started clicking together like dominoes in my chest. They knew. They'd found out about the settlement. I wasn't sure how. Maybe a cousin overheard something at a family dinner. Maybe Chase saw my name in a local legal filing. Maybe it was just word spreading like wildfire the way it always did when money was involved. But it didn't matter. The timing said it all. I didn't respond right away. I needed a plan. So I called Ms. Renna, my lawyer, and explained what was happening. She didn't sound surprised. "People like that always come crawling back when there's a check to chase," she said. "You don't owe them anything, Lena, but you have every right to let them show who they are." I decided to let them come. Not because I wanted to see them, but because I needed to. I needed to know, face to face, what they looked like when they finally realized I wasn't the same Lena they'd left behind. They showed up that Saturday. Joan in her pearls, Rick in his polo, and Chase, of course, smug as ever, with Morgan trailing behind, holding a gift bag like we were at a birthday brunch. I kept my expression calm when I opened the door. I looked stronger than I felt. I wore real clothes. My walker was tucked away. My bruises were mostly healed, and my eyes were clear. They walked in like they owned the place. Joan commented on how cute the apartment was. Rick said, "You're looking better than we expected," which I chose not to unpack. Chase offered a stiff hug and gave me the bag. Inside was a lavender-scented candle. How touching. We sat in the living room. I didn't offer drinks. I didn't ask how they were. I just sat across from them with my hands folded and waited. And then Joan pulled out the paperwork. She set it on my coffee table like it was a menu at a family restaurant. "Your father and I had a little chat with a friend of ours. He's in estate law. We just wanted to help you figure out how to manage the money responsibly. You know, now that you've got so much on your plate." I stared at the papers. Legal language, financial planning, signatures half filled. They hadn't come to check on me. They'd come to stake a claim. Rick nodded solemnly. "It's just so you don't get overwhelmed, sweetheart. You've never handled that kind of money before." Chase leaned forward. "We just think it's important to protect it. Make sure it's in the right hands." I laughed. Out loud. And then I stood. I walked to the side table where I had set something aside just for this moment, a sealed envelope. I handed it to Joan and sat back down. "What's this?" she asked. "Something from my doctor," I said. "You should read it." She opened it and read silently. Her face tightened with every line. Rick leaned over her shoulder, frowning. Chase looked bored until Joan handed him the letter. It was from Dr. Jensen. A formal clinical recommendation, based on medical evaluation, that stated continued contact with my family was detrimental to my recovery due to patterns of emotional neglect and psychological stress. It advised temporary or indefinite distancing from family interactions for the benefit of my mental health. When Chase finished reading it, he looked up and scoffed. "Seriously? You had a doctor write us a breakup letter?" Joan's voice trembled slightly. "Lena, this is absurd. We're your family." "No," I said. "You're people who left me alone in a hospital bed and only remembered I existed when you heard about the money. That's not family. That's convenience." There was silence, thick and awkward. Joan stood abruptly, folding the letter like it was contaminated. "This isn't who you are." "You're right," I said. "It's who I am without you." They didn't fight. Not really. They just left. No yelling. No tears. Just tight lips and empty hands. They walked out of my apartment like strangers. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The silence after they left was different this time. It wasn't heavy. It didn't sting. It felt clean. Like a deep breath after being underwater too long. I sat on the couch for a while after the door closed behind them. My heart was still racing, but it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline. The kind that surges when you stand up for yourself and realize you survived it. The kind that makes you feel taller even if your knees are still shaking. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I just sat there with my back straight and my head high, letting the weight of what had just happened settle into my chest. I had finally told them the truth. And more importantly, I had done it without begging to be understood. That night, I took out the same spreadsheet I had made in the hospital, the one I'd labeled Rebuild. I looked at the rows of quiet goals I had set. Get a new apartment, restart physical therapy, start real therapy, build savings, set boundaries. Then I added a new row. Create something I'm proud of. Just for me. It hit me that for all the design work I'd done for clients, I hadn't made anything purely for myself in years. Not since art school. Everything had been transactional, strategic. A way to prove I was worthy. So I opened my sketchbook. At first, I didn't know what to draw. The pencil felt strange in my hand. I stared at the blank page like it was daring me to be honest. And then, slowly, I started sketching the hospital window. The one I used to sit beside in the early mornings. The sunlight hitting the glass. My reflection faint but visible. Alone, but still standing. Then I added more, pieces of myself, symbols of what I had survived. A tiny fourth line curled into the shape of a heart. A cracked ribcage with a blooming flower pushing through. A voice in the shadows, finally stepping forward. It took me days, maybe a week. But when it was done, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. There was a small gallery downtown, run by a nonprofit that supported survivors of trauma and abuse. They accepted community submissions for their upcoming exhibit, Healing in Pieces. I emailed them my design and shared a brief summary of my story. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. I told them about surviving a car accident, about emotional abandonment, about rebuilding. I hit send without overthinking it. 2 weeks later, I got the response. "We'd love to feature your piece." I stood in front of my framed drawing the night of the exhibit's opening. People walked past, studying it, reading the little description beside it. One woman wiped a tear from her cheek. A man nodded slowly, as if it made sense to him in some private, unspoken way. Nobody knew it was mine, not at first. And then, during the community artist portion of the night, I stepped up to the mic. My hands were trembling. My voice cracked. But I told the truth. Not just about the accident, but about what came after. About the kind of hurt that isn't visible on X-rays. About the pain of being left behind by the people you were told would love you unconditionally. About choosing to live anyway. And when I finished, there was silence. Then applause. Not loud or thunderous, but real, kind, human. And in that moment, I didn't feel like the girl who was forgotten in a hospital bed. I didn't feel like the one who wasn't good enough. I felt like an artist, a survivor, a woman who saved herself and made something beautiful out of the wreckage. Later that night, Mariah, who came with me and held my hand during my speech, hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs might crack again. "You did it," she whispered. "You turned the worst thing into something powerful." And she was right. This wasn't revenge. It was resurrection. I didn't need my family's approval. I didn't need their praise. I had something they could never take from me. The truth. And I'd framed it on a wall for the whole world to see. After the gallery exhibit, something in me softened. Not in a weak way, in the way a scar finally stops aching. I had expected to feel proud that night, but what I didn't expect was how seen I would feel. Fully, quietly seen. Not by my family, but by strangers. By people who had felt invisible too. That was the night I began to believe in something I used to dismiss as naive. Chosen family. For so long, I believed love had to come with obligation. That loyalty was something you earned through pain. That support had to be negotiated, rationed, or repaid. But what I was learning, slowly and deeply, was that real support doesn't keep score. It just shows up. And it started showing up in the people I never expected. Mariah was the first. She was the sister of my hospital roommate, just a woman in her early 30s with curly hair, a soft laugh, and a protective energy that made you feel instantly safe. She had stopped by my room during those quiet, unbearable days, with snacks, fresh socks, and stories from her own life that made me forget about the beeping machines and sterile walls. But after we were both discharged, she didn't disappear. She texted me once a week just to check in, dropped off groceries when she knew I was too sore to shop, sat on my couch with me during hard days, and never once made me feel like I owed her anything for it. One afternoon I asked her, "Why are you being so kind to me?" She blinked and said, "Because someone should have been. And if not them, then me." That answer broke something open in me. I had spent my entire life bracing for the moment when people would leave. So much so that when someone stayed, I didn't know what to do with it. But Mariah never made me explain myself. Never pushed. She just stayed. Then there was Ellie, one of my nurses at the hospital. She wasn't just doing her job. She truly cared. She'd remembered the name of my cat, asked about my sketchbook, and left a note taped to my water pitcher the morning I was discharged. It read, "You are more than what they gave you. Heal loud." I messaged her later through the hospital's patient portal just to thank her. She replied with a coffee invitation. We met a few days later, and she brought me a notebook, Blank pages, hardcover, perfect for sketching. "No pressure," she said. "Just fill it with things that remind you who you are." I didn't realize how badly I needed those words. And then there was my therapist, Dr. Jensen. What began as obligatory hospital visits turned into something sacred. I booked private sessions with her as soon as I was mobile enough to get there. She never rushed me, never labeled me, never fed me tired affirmations. Instead, she gave me language, words for the chaos I had lived with. Family systems, emotional neglect, scapegoat dynamic. She made it clear that I wasn't crazy, I was conditioned. And more importantly, I wasn't broken. I was responding to years of unhealed hurt in exactly the way a person learns to survive. With her help, I started building something that felt impossible before. Trust. Not just in others, but in myself. Trust that I could choose who belonged in my life, that I didn't need to accept love with barbed wire wrapped around it, that my boundaries weren't walls to keep people out. They were doors that only opened for the right ones. Slowly, I created a circle. Small, yes, but real. Mariah, Ellie, a few clients who became friends. A woman from the trauma support group Dr. Jensen recommended. Her name was Sierra, a fierce, hilarious mom of two who taught me how to say no without guilt and yes without apology. These people didn't know everything about me, but they saw enough to care, and their support wasn't loud. It was quiet, consistent. A text that read, "Thinking of you today." An extra chair at a dinner table. A shared laugh that reminded me life could still be sweet. They weren't perfect, but they didn't need to be, because they were present. And presence, I've learned, is more powerful than any apology that comes too late. I used to think family was blood and tradition. Now I know, family is who shows up when your world falls apart, and stays to help you rebuild it. If my confrontation with them was quiet and controlled, what came next wasn't. It started innocently enough. A Facebook post, harmless on the surface. Joan posted a photo from the previous weekend. Her and Rick standing on their perfectly trimmed front lawn, wine glasses in hand. The caption read, "So proud of our resilient daughter Lena for overcoming such a difficult season. We've been with her every step of the way. Family first, Chirkasa grateful." I stared at the post for a full minute before the anger hit. Every step, office the way. They hadn't even taken a step toward the hospital. They hadn't sat beside my bed or held my hand, or brought a single meal when I came home barely able to climb the stairs. But now, after I shut the door on them, they wanted to wear my recovery like a medal. Publicly, as if my healing was theirs to claim. I didn't comment. I didn't message her. I didn't even tell my therapist. Not yet. I just sat in that ugly kind of disbelief that simmers beneath your skin until it either boils over or freezes you in place. And then, something unexpected happened. My Aunt Carol, my mom's older sister, commented on the post. Carol had always been a bit of a black sheep in the family. She moved to Oregon in her 20s, lived in a cottage with her cats, and didn't make it back for holidays often. But she and I had kept in touch over the years through sporadic messages. She was one of the few relatives who ever really asked how I was, and actually waited for an answer. Her comment said, "With her every step of the way." "Joan, you didn't even visit her in the hospital. Stop rewriting the story to fit your version of it." My jaw dropped. Within hours, the post had more than 30 comments. Most were relatives, cousins, old family friends, neighbors. Some were surprised. Others were confused. A few messaged me directly. "Wait, I thought your mom said she was there?" Or, "Are you okay? I didn't know it was that serious." So I did something I never thought I'd do. I told the truth. I posted a simple message on my own page. No drama, no rage, just facts. Thank you to everyone who has reached out. Recovery has been hard, physically and emotionally. I'm grateful to the people who supported me through it. Unfortunately, not everyone did. For those who've heard otherwise, I was alone in the hospital. No visits, no calls, no family dinners. I'm healing, and I'm doing it without the people who chose not to show up. That was it. It didn't take long before the damage spread through the web Joan had spent years spinning. Cousins who'd always idolized my mom started asking questions. Extended family members started pulling away from her. Even some of her close church friends sent me private messages saying they were disappointed in how things were handled. Then came the phone call. Joan. I let it go to voicemail. She left a clipped message. Lena, I don't know what you're trying to do, but airing family matters online is immature and cruel. You're making things worse. I played it twice, then deleted it, because I wasn't making things worse. I was telling the truth. And when people know the truth, they start seeing things differently. They start remembering that time she belittled me at Christmas. That time I wasn't invited to the family photo. That time I left dinner early, and no one asked why. The cracks were already there. I had just turned on the light. For the first time in my life, Joan's control over the narrative slipped. And not because I fought dirty, but because I stopped covering for her. I stopped softening the edges of her behavior to protect her reputation. I stopped apologizing for needing love she refused to give. She built her identity around being the strong, sacrificial mother. And I had always played my role, the wayward daughter, the creative mess, the emotional burden. But now that script was shredded. Now I was simply Lena, an adult, a survivor, a truth teller. And she couldn't unhear the things people were finally saying. She couldn't undo the truth now that it was out in the open. Her version of the story had been exposed, not by rage, not by revenge, but by facts. By my refusal to lie anymore. And when the masks come off, the ones hiding behind them are never ready for the mirror. It's strange how clarity doesn't arrive like thunder. It comes quietly, like the slow draw of a curtain letting sunlight into a room you forgot had windows. After everything, the accident, the silence, the betrayal, the lies, you'd think I'd be filled with bitterness. But I wasn't. I was just done. Done pretending. Done hoping. Done bending myself into versions of acceptable that served other people but suffocated me. My healing wasn't just about my body anymore. It was about truth, integrity, living a life that felt honest, not impressive, not polished, not safe, but honest. And that meant making peace with a hard truth. I could love my family and still walk away from them. Love didn't have to look like constant sacrifice. It didn't have to mean open doors for people who only came through to take. It didn't have to include second chances for those who never asked for them. I could forgive them quietly, without inviting them back into my life. That was a new kind of strength I didn't know I had. Dr. Jensen helped me see that. In one of our last sessions, I asked her, what if they change? What if, one day, they do the work? She looked at me for a long moment and said, then they'll have the privilege of becoming someone new. But that doesn't obligate you to bring them back into your life. Healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it just means peace. Peace. That word stayed with me. It became my compass. I started writing a new list, not tasks or goals this time, but values. Things I wanted to live by. Not for show. For me. I wrote, my time is valuable. My pain is valid, even if others refuse to see it. I will not explain my boundaries to those who never respected them. I choose relationships that feel safe, honest, and mutual. I do not need permission to live fully. I printed it, taped it to my bathroom mirror, and read it every morning like a prayer I was writing into my bones. And something started shifting. I stood taller. I replied slower. I said no without guilt, and yes without apology. People noticed, clients, friends, even strangers. Something about me had changed, and it wasn't just confidence, it was calm. A steadiness that came from finally believing that I didn't have to chase love anymore. If someone wanted a seat at my table, they had to bring more than empty expectations. They had to bring kindness, consistency, truth. And I had to bring myself, fully, unapologetically, without shrinking. One of the biggest moments for me came unexpectedly. It was a quiet afternoon. I was having coffee on my balcony, sketchbook open, drawing a new piece for the trauma center fundraiser I'd volunteered to design for. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Chase. The subject line read, "Sorry." Inside it said, "I don't know what to say. I handled everything badly. I don't even know why I'm reaching out, maybe just to say I finally get it. I saw what Mom posted. I saw what Carol wrote. And I guess I realized I didn't know you at all. I'm sorry I never tried." I sat with the message for a long time. Not because I didn't believe him, but because it didn't change anything. I didn't need him to get it. Not anymore. I wrote back, "Thank you. I appreciate the message. I'm healing, and that means I need distance. I hope you take care of yourself." I hit send and felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just peace. That was when I knew I'd truly changed. The old me would have rushed to fix things, to make him feel better, to be the bigger person. But I didn't need to be bigger anymore. I just needed to be me. Whole, steady, enough. I closed my laptop, took another sip of coffee, and turned back to my sketchbook. My life was no longer about proving anything to people who couldn't see me. It was about building something beautiful for the version of me who always could. There's a moment after the storm passes, when the air feels different, cleaner, lighter. It's not that the damage didn't happen. It's that you can finally see the ground clearly enough to start rebuilding. That's where I found myself. Not healed completely, but whole enough to begin. I moved out of my apartment 2 months after the gallery exhibit. It wasn't because I needed more space. It was because I needed new energy. A fresh start that didn't carry echoes of past versions of myself, curled on the couch, waiting for calls that never came. I found a small duplex on the east side of the city. Nothing fancy, but the walls were bright, the floors creaked in a comforting way, and the windows faced the morning sun. I filled it with color. Not trendy neutrals or safe tones. Real color. Warm reds, cobalt blues, deep greens. I hung my own art on the walls, not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. I named my new space the Quiet House. Not because it was silent, but because it was finally free from noise that didn't belong to me. And in that quiet, I began to create. I had always used my skills as a designer to build other people's dreams, their logos, their brand, their voice. But now I wanted to build something of my own. Something that mattered. Something that could help others the way I'd once needed help. So I launched a small project called Brave Lines. It started as a free art workshop at a local women's shelter, just a Sunday afternoon class where survivors of abuse or trauma could sit, draw, talk, or just be. I brought sketchbooks, pencils, and snacks. I didn't teach so much as hold space. The first session had 4 women. The second had 11. By the 5th, we had to move into the community center. Some of them drew, some wrote poetry. Some just cried while they shaded in circles with crayons. It didn't matter. What mattered was that we were together, that we were making something. I didn't do it for money. I did it because I knew how powerful it is to create when the world has tried to silence you. And in giving others that space, I found more of myself. I started accepting new freelance clients again, but only the ones who respected my boundaries. I raised my rates. I stopped apologizing for saying no. And for the first time in my career, I stopped feeling like I had to prove I was legit. I was legit because I said so. My days became quiet rituals, morning coffee on the balcony, walks with Mariah after dinner, weekly therapy with Dr. Jensen, monthly brunches with the Brave Lines crew. I planted herbs in a little pot on my kitchen sill, basil, thyme, lavender, and felt joy just watching something grow. I wasn't chasing anything anymore. Not validation, not approval, not apologies that were never coming. I had replaced the hunger for love with the presence of it. Not the conditional kind, but the kind that shows up in friends who text just to say, "thinking of you," or clients who pay on time without pushing your boundaries, or in the feeling of walking into a space that feels like yours. Sometimes I still thought about my family. Sometimes I wondered what they told people at church, or what Chase said when someone asked about his sister. But the difference now was that I didn't need to know. Their story was theirs. Mine was finally in my hands, and it wasn't defined by pain anymore. It was defined by choice, by healing, by a life built not on what I lost, but on what I chose to grow in its place. One night, I hosted a small gathering at the Quiet House. Nothing big, just a few people: Mariah, Ellie, Sierra from my support group, and a couple of women from the art workshop. We sat on the floor, ate homemade pasta, and laughed until we cried. Someone asked me, "What's next?" And I said without hesitation, "Peace." More of it. Because the old me would have answered with goals, a timeline, a 10-point plan. But the new me, she just wanted to be happy. And for the first time, she was. It had been nearly 5 months since I last saw my family when I got the letter. It wasn't from Joan, not from Rick, not from Morgan, Chase's wife. It was from him, Chase himself. A real letter? Handwritten. The envelope had no return address, just my name and street printed in his familiar, blocky handwriting. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. I wasn't scared, just unsure. He had reached out once before, remember? The email that said, "I'm sorry." But that felt like a gesture. This felt like something heavier. I opened it slowly. The letter was short, careful. No dramatic declarations, no begging, but different than what I expected. "Lena, I've started therapy. That's not a line. It's just something I thought you should know. I've been thinking about a lot of things I didn't want to look at before. Stuff I used to blame on you or brush off or pretend didn't matter. But it did. You did. You do. I don't know how to make it right. I don't expect a response. But I needed to say that I see it now. Not all of it, but enough to know I hurt you. I hope you're okay. I hope you're doing more than okay. Chase." I folded the letter and set it down, and then I just sat there. No tears, no anger, no impulse to rush and forgive. Just a quiet kind of recognition. This was new. This wasn't him mocking me or minimizing me. This wasn't performative. This was a crack in his armor. A small one, maybe, but real. Later that day, I brought the letter to therapy. Dr. Jensen read it once and said, "Do you want to respond?" I thought about it. And eventually I did. I didn't write back to him directly. I didn't call. Instead, I sat down with my laptop, opened a new document, and wrote a letter of my own. One I didn't intend to send. At least, not right away. It was for me. It was for closure. But I also wrote something short that I did send. A simple reply. "Chase, thank you for the letter. I appreciate the honesty. I hope you continue doing the work. I'm not ready to reconnect, but I'm glad you're starting your own healing. Take care, Lena." And that was it. No door reopened, no phone call arranged, no Thanksgiving invite extended. Just a soft, strong boundary drawn with kindness. Because here's the truth. Healing doesn't always mean going back. Sometimes it means accepting the apology and still choosing the distance. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is not pick up where you left off, because where you left off was killing you. It wasn't about holding a grudge. It was about protecting the peace I had worked so hard to build. Still, that letter stayed on my desk for weeks, not because I was clinging to it, but because it reminded me that people can grow. Not always, not quickly, not perfectly. But sometimes they do. Chase may never fully understand the weight of what happened, but he no longer denied it. And maybe, in his own quiet way, he was trying to be better. But Joan? Rick? They never reached out again. Not after the Facebook fallout. Not after the letter from Dr. Jensen. Not after I removed them from every corner of my life. And I was okay with that. Because not every story ends with a reunion. Some stories end with a release. I didn't need a picture-perfect resolution. I didn't need holiday dinners or forced hugs or family photos where I pretended everything was okay. What I needed, what I had, was truth. Truth that I was never the problem. Truth that I had done my part. Truth that I could walk away, not in bitterness, but in peace. And that, to me, was reconciliation enough. I used to think closure came in a dramatic scene, a tearful apology, a long overdue confession, some final moment that made everything click into place. But I've learned it's much quieter than that. Closure is drinking your morning coffee in a home you chose, sitting in a chair no one picked out for you, wrapped in a peace you didn't have to fight for. It's the absence of chaos, the stillness that comes when you no longer live in survival mode. One morning, I woke up before the sun and couldn't go back to sleep. Normally, I would have reached for my phone, scrolled, distracted myself. But that day, I just let myself sit in the silence. I stepped out onto the balcony. The sky was still dark, painted with soft pinks and purples bleeding into the edges of dawn. I wrapped myself in a blanket and watched the world start over. No noise, no demands, just breath and light. That's when it hit me. This is it. This is the life I built from ashes. A life where I get to choose who has access to me. Where love isn't something I audition for. Where my voice isn't something I have to prove or protect. It just exists. And it's mine. I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who sat in hospital beds and family dinners and therapist offices, trying to explain the ache of not being chosen. Not once. Not ever. And I wanted to reach back in time and tell her, you were never unlovable. You were just around people who couldn't love in the way you needed. That wasn't your fault. And it never meant you were broken. I've come to understand that healing isn't a destination. It's not a mountaintop you reach with a flag in hand. It's a daily practice. A quiet promise. It's looking in the mirror and choosing yourself over and over, especially on the days when it would be easier to fall back into old patterns. Some people think cutting family out is cruel, but there's nothing cruel about protecting your peace. What's cruel is expecting someone to keep bleeding for love that never arrives. I used to crave their validation. I used to dream about proving them wrong, becoming successful enough, strong enough, good enough that they'd finally say, "We're proud of you." But now, I'm proud of me, for surviving, for staying soft, for building something beautiful from pain that could have hardened me forever. These days I keep my circle small. I say no quickly. I laugh more. I cry less. I write thank you notes. I hug the people who deserve it a little longer. I check on myself like I would a friend. And when I feel that old ache of loneliness, I remind myself that I'm not lonely. I'm free. That's the difference. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe Chase and I will talk again one day. Maybe we won't. Maybe Joan will grow a conscience in her old age. Or maybe not. Either way, it doesn't change the life I'm building. Because I'm no longer waiting. Not for their approval. Not for their love. Not for closure. I found it in myself. In the quiet. In the art. In the boundaries. In the friends who became family. In the sunrise I watch with a full breath and an open heart. So if you're listening to this, and your story feels like mine, if you're lying in your own version of a hospital bed, waiting for someone to come and they never do, let me tell you something. You're not invisible. You're not too much. You're not wrong for wanting more. And if they can't love you the way you need, that's not the end of the story. It might just be the beginning. You deserve the kind of love that shows up, that stays, that celebrates you for who you are, not what you offer. And if you haven't found it yet, don't worry. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin the day you decide to choose yourself. I did, and it changed everything.